You know what I mean? When virtually everything that you can observe is going against everything that these guys say. Like, I want to know what kind of, like, who is the type of dude that watches and goes, hell yeah, they're doing so many deals, dude. They're doing so many deals. America's on the up and up, dude. Trump brought in $100 gazillion, dude.
Dr. Navarro, welcome back to the programme, sir. First of all, I think we've got to get into the ruling overnight. Have you spoken to the president? And ultimately, what's his reaction to what we heard?
Haven't spoken to the president yet, but...
This is the libbest you've ever been, maybe. Because I'm desperate, man. I'm desperate, okay? I'm desperate. What are you talking about? It's literally the same reason why I was like, look, man, I don't really care. Obviously, it's a bribe that Qatar gave Donald Trump a $400 million plane. Like, it's not... That's a bribe. Like, everybody knows that's a bribe. This is just how he operates. If that bribe moved him even marginally in the direction of a ceasefire era, it's awesome. I'll fly to Qatar right now, you know, and kiss the feet. Do you see what I mean? It's more so coming from a place of desperation rather than joking. You're spot on that anything that drives him insane is great. Yeah, I mean, that's funny. It's funny that it drives him insane. But it's also like when you're that desperate, you'll use whatever you can to your advantage. Why is the view count so low? What's going on? I started early today, and when you start early, it just like cooks. I've trained my audience to basically watch me after 11 a.m. And instead I started at 10, which implies that it probably doesn't send out notifications to many people. Many people on Twitch. Anyway, let's keep going.
I've spoken to the people who have spoken to the president. Look, we're in a situation now. Big picture here is IEPA. We were using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. There's no question that there's an economic emergency with respect to both uses that we had. One is we are in a world where China has killed over 1 million Americans with fentanyl poison, and we took this step to stop that. We will continue to press on that. At the same time, we invoked that rule to stop what has been 20 million illegal aliens streaming into our country, driving down wages, taking jobs away. That's an economic emergency. And on top of that, the world continues to steal about $1 trillion a year as measured by the trade deficit. And that's an economic emergency because it's transferring our wealth abroad. So we think we have a strong case. Yes. We will immediately appeal and try to stay the ruling. But at the same time, the court, interestingly enough, basically said we were right, just use different rules and laws. So nothing has really changed here in that sense. We're still, as we speak, having countries call us and tell us they want a deal. So these deals are going to...
I want to close my eyes for a moment and imagine, like, I want to put myself in the shoes of a guy who hears Peter Navarro say this and then believes it. You know what I mean? When virtually everything that you can observe is going against everything that these guys say. Like, I want to know what kind of, like, who is the type of dude that watches and goes, hell yeah, they're doing so many deals, dude. They're doing so many deals. America's on the up and up, dude. Trump brought in $100 gazillion, dude. And you're like, Dad, that's not a real number. You just heard that on television. Who told you this? Nah, you don't understand. America's on the up and up. It's the hottest it's ever been. Everyone on Facebook is unironically that guy. React to the necessary conversation. What's that? Like, who's listening to this and going, yep, sounds good to me. Sounds like we're winning, okay? Big time. At this point, there is like, it's gotten to it's gotten to a point where it's like hard to, I don't know. Like, what is the purpose of all of this? They just lie about everything, like all the time with great frequency. And I guess people kind of believe it. You know, people just believe it. They want to believe it, so they believe it. We're moving into a new formation. We're moving into a new formation where it's just like AI, cults. Politics is just cult-like. It doesn't matter. No more interest in the truth whatsoever, even when things directly impact you. But I guess you can always lie, and then once push comes to shove, and once like you start recognizing the impact of these statements, the impact of the actual harm, once you actually recognize the real harm that you're experiencing from these decisions, well, then by that point, they'll move on to the other thing. They'll move on to another thing to get mad about and redirect your attention to something else.
To happen. So that's kind of where we're at. And it's troublesome here because if you look broadly at the pattern, we've got courts in this country who are basically engaged in attacks on the American people. The president ran on stopping the fentanyl poisoning, stopping international trade unfair practices from stealing our factories and jobs. And courts keep getting in the way of that. The courts get in the way of our trying to deal with the border issues. Now they're getting in the way of our trying to deal with the fentanyl crisis. And that's where we stand here. And I think part of what's going to be important about this ruling demonstrates yet again to the American people that the judiciary in this country has been in ways which are contrary to their interests.
Well, Peter, you would have heard a lot of people come on this program and ultimately say you still have tons of options. And you alluded to one of them. You will, of course, appeal. But could you describe what you might do in the interim, the way you might pursue your ultimate objective anyway, with the tools you have still available to you?
I'm going to let Jamison Greer, the USTR, inform you on that, and you'll be hearing from him soon on that. But I mean, look, any trade lawyer knows there's just a number of different options we can take. If you look at the kind of things we've already done, it kind of give you a roadmap on that. There's all sorts of numbers out there. There's 122, there's 301, there's 232, there's 338. There's all sorts of things we can do well within the law. But look, we think one already is perfectly appropriate. So that's why the appeal will take case. But, you know, it's like, interestingly enough, I was scheduled to come on the program today to talk about the bond market and the big, beautiful tax bill. But there is a bridge to.
I love that they're calling it the big, beautiful tax bill. Again, another point for the complete devolution, the complete regression of American political discourse, American politics in general. It's just so, it's signaled to the dumbest guy you know. Everything that this administration is doing is signaling to the stupidest person you've ever encountered, okay? Incredible, fantastic, phenomenal. I was here to talk about the big, beautiful bill, but we got numbers. We got numbers we can use.
To that, and if I may, we have a situation where the bond market, we've seen like a 50 basis point increase in yields in the 10-year since April 2nd. And a lot of the hysteria around the big, beautiful tax bill centers on the Congressional Budget Office scoring that bill in a way which says there's going to be a $3.7 trillion addition to America's national debt over the next 10 years. And so, of course, you got to finance that, and that drives interest rates.
Yeah. Obviously, one might ask, why do we have this? Why is this bill supposed to add to the deficit? I don't understand. I thought Republicans cared about the deficit. I thought they were deficit hawks. Oh, that's right. It's because it's a massive wealth transfer. Once again, it is supposed to offer ginormous tax cuts to the wealthiest in American society. And in order to make up for that, in order to make up for the trillions of dollars in tax cuts, you have to take money away from someone. And that money that they're taking away from people is the working poor. Many of them are in the Trump base, as a matter of fact. Many of them who rely on Medicare, as a matter of fact. 8 to 12 million kicked off of Medicare coverage, SNAP benefits taken away from tens of millions of people with children. Fantastic stuff overall for the working poor. Get back to work and enslave yourselves. You're able-bodied enough is the attitude. Very cool. Very cool to do this, I think, in America. Big, beautiful bill. Gonna be awesome. Can't wait to win and win harder and win more. I'm just so tired of winning.
Up and heads explode. When, in fact, if you do the math properly and you look at the history of the CBO forecast, you actually see about a $5 trillion swing to a $2 trillion.
Sorry, Medicaid, not Medicare. Did I say Medicare?
Dollar surplus from the bill. And I'd like to just walk you through the math there. It's like the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, historically has been very bad at estimating impacts of tax bills. In the 2017 tax cut that President Trump did, they got that totally wrong. They underestimated the GDP growth by a full percentage point. And what that does, if they make that same mistake here, which they have done, when you add that, that's about $2 trillion of additional revenue because you got greater economic activity. And then,
Peter, you also have the revenue from the tariffs, which I saw your opinion piece in The Hill. I just want to get back to the I just want to get back to the tariffs because you don't have that revenue.
Well, that's another $2 trillion.
If you don't have the legal authority to use it, though.
That gets us.
But can I just ask? You mentioned Ambassador Greer. We're going to hear from him soon. Are we going to hear from USTR about the bridge, potentially what John was talking about? If you can't use IEPA, potentially you're going to come out, the administration say we're going to use 122 in the interim.
Well, the court did in some sense tell us to do that, which was interesting. But look, here's the thing. Fentanyl, I just, people need to wrap their heads around the fact that every day here in America, people die because communist China puts 50-gallon drums full of these chemicals that come over to the Mexican cartels and then are made not just into fentanyl. They use the fentanyl to spike heroin, to spike methamphetamines, to spike ecstasy, and they're even putting it in prescription drugs like Xanax and Valium. And people are dying. It's been over 1 million people, 1 million Americans. And it's an economic emergency because a lot of those people are prime age working force here in America. So this kind of court ruling, the judge, I mean, look, the lead.
Does anyone believe that the Trump tariff stuff is for fentanyl? I feel like obviously they wanted to do this in a way where they could declare a national emergency so that they could have even more power. Because normally a lot of the tariff stuff, especially if it's directional, especially if it's like industry specific, is usually left up to the executive authority. Congress has historically allowed the executive office, the White House, to make decisions on tariffs. But Donald Trump knows, or at least Donald Trump's advisors know, that he can't make these broad declarative, and not industry-wide, but broad declarative tariffs on every single country in the way that he has. Obviously, as the courts also have ruled, you do not have that kind of power, right? And therefore he had to find, like, I guess his advisors had to find a devious way to give him this awesome power, this extraordinary power, right? And part of that comes from declaring things a national emergency. If you declare something a national emergency, then the White House has more power than it did prior. Okay, so in order to declare something a national emergency, or in order to use the tariffs as a weapon to wield, he basically said, like, oh, this is the fentanyl. It's because of fentanyl. Fentanyl's coming over the border. and that is a national emergency. Too many people are dying because of fentanyl. And then he turned around and said, that's why we're tariffing fucking Canada. And I feel like when he just did it on Mexico, it was one thing where most people are like, yeah, it is coming from the southern border, even though ironically, a lot of the tariffs are, a lot of the fentanyl is coming from China by way of regular points of entry, okay, through, normal routes of commerce, okay. But having said that, when he was like, oh, that's why we're actually putting a tariff on Canada because of fentanyl, everyone was like, what the fuck do you mean? Like, it's just, none of it makes sense. None of it makes sense. It doesn't, like, I don't know why he's even, like, who believes this? Who's like, yeah, this is actually a great crisis by adding tariffs, by basically slapping a sales tax, a broad sales tax on all consumer goods. We are combating fentanyl.
But if the court said, if the ruling said, Peter, and we've been talking about this, page 34, 35, they say, basically, you are in your right if you use Section 122. Why didn't you guys do that from the beginning?
Well, Section 122 only gives you 150 days. So there's your answer right there.
So, Section 122, if you use this now for 150 days, would it be a bridge to 301 or a bridge to 232? What are you thinking more long term?
You can be the strategist on that, but those are the kinds of thoughts. And look, if anybody thinks this caught the administration...
That's not... You guys are throwing up question marks, but again, the president has, by Congress and through precedent, broad powers on directing trade. Okay. So the question that they're asking Peter Navarro here is not the wrong one, where it's like, you already have these powers. Why wouldn't you use those powers? Why are you instead trying to do this unconstitutional way of, or this illegal way of applying these broad tariffs across the board? And I guess it's maybe a trial balloon. I really don't have a good answer for it. I think that's they didn't use it because they didn't know. No. That's not true. I don't think that. Like, yes, Trump is stupid and Peter Navarro is stupid. A lot of people at the top are stupid, but they have actual advisors. Stop. They have actual fucking advisors. Please. Especially Republicans. If you think Republicans don't have devious methods, no shot, dude. No shot. This is all they do. Like Donald Trump right now is following through on 40 years, almost 40 years of the Republican agenda. It's not out of pocket at all. Every action that he has made in terms of creating this unilateral power structure in the hands of the executive office, in the hands of the White House, that is not new, okay? That is just a continuation of the unitary executive theory. It's not, this is following the Heritage Foundation's project that has been around and been implemented slowly but surely for almost 40 years. This is not new. It's not new at all. And I think part of the reason why they're doing this stuff, part of the reason why the Trump administration is doing this stuff is because they think this is on the power of the executive office by simply calling something a national emergency and then behaving this way and then testing out the courts to ensure that they have this kind of broad sweeping power. I think that's the reason why they're doing it. Because once again, if you think that the Trump administration doesn't have advisors like Heritage Foundation guys that aren't constantly looking at different ways in which to increase the power of the executive office, you're wrong. The one thing that I believe they're too incompetent to do is just like set up a false flag to greatly expand on the powers of to greatly push for, I don't know, some kind of new war or additional emergency powers that allow them to start deporting American citizens, stuff like that. I think they're too incompetent to set up like a psyop or a false flag. I don't want to make predictions on that though. Who knows? But right now, when I look at like the way that they operate, it's pretty basic. They're kind of blundering into a lot of these positions. They're trying to just basically hip check their way into this agenda. One of the greatest examples of this was what happened with Mahmoud Khalil. Like they are basically working with groups like fucking Beitar. They could have started this process by going after like actually, undocumented migrants or documented citizens that weren't legal permanent residents that had said a lot of violent stuff. You know what I mean? Even though it's still constitutionally protected, they could have at least like massaged this in a way where the public sentiment would not be broadly against this kind of anti-1A, anti-First Amendment initiative. But they didn't do that. They just worked with Beitar and thought that Mahmoud Khalil, for example, was on a student visa. They didn't even realize you had a green card and an American wife with a child on the way. Like, these are major mistakes that you're making that are actually very consequential when you're trying to work within the confines of the pre-existing system and moving that in the direction of tyrannical fascism. That kind of uncertainty and that kind of incompetence is basically the only silver lining in this admission. Gives me a little bit more courage and a little bit more confidence that they might not be able to implement all of their desires, because I certainly do not believe in the Democratic Party as far as like resisting against these initiatives that the Trump administration is implementing. They're basically failing due to the awesome power that they have, due to the fact that they have greatly miscalculated how much support they have for a lot of the things that they're doing. And we shall see.
Administration by surprise, think again, okay? Because you could see in the oral arguments where those judges were going, and the lead judge in this. I mean, the problem with that court, it's such an obscure court, but it's consistently been globalist, pro-importer, giving us bad rulings. The lead judge there ruled against the 232s originally and had to get overturned by the appeals court. So that gives you an idea of the bias against the president's tariff policy right on that court. But I think the big picture here is we've got a very strong case with IEPA, but the court basically tells us if we lose that, we just do some other thing. So nothing's really changed in the world. You're cheating us. We're coming after you. Deal. And let's make this right, because ultimately what's at stake here is the global international environment getting in a way where it's fair to America, and thereby, if it's fair to America and we restructure this thing in a way, we'll have just more stability in terms of financial flows and capital and everything like that.
Dr. Navarro.
It's wildly out of balance now.